Hey everyone, Emmerron here. So tonight's video, we're going to talk about how to write gigs. So gigs are fun. To some new GMs, they're probably the most intimidating thing about maybe wanting to GM, which is why I always recommend starting with pre-written stuff. If you go on a pre-written gig or grab, like in Cyberpunk, what we call scream sheets, they're good hooks. They give you a lot to start with, and they give you an idea how a game is supposed to be scripted and some baseline idea of how to run it. Usually things like the biggest example being Tales from the Red, which is a whole book that you can get on Artelsorian's website, as well as Drive Through RPG in digital format. That whole book covers from start to finish a whole bunch of different gigs of all kind of different types that happen all throughout Night City. So if you are new to GMing the game, it maybe isn't your first stop, but it'll be one of the first that you probably take when you start getting beyond just the couple of pre-written scream sheets that you get in the back of the core rulebook, and maybe some of the free stuff that RTG has made available on their website. So when we talk about that, right, we start there because we need a template. In my opinion, I know I'm like this, where I need a template when I start playing a new game or doing something for the first time. I like to know, what am I supposed to do? You know, like, what is the quote unquote like right way to do this? Even if there's no such thing as really a correct way, it gives you a good baseline, a good template, like I've said. So after you've done that and you're like, wow, I think I've got an idea of how this whole thing is supposed to work. You've read through the running Cyberpunk chapter at the back of the core rulebook, and you say, running Cyberpunk, I know that front to back, left, right, upside down. I could read it in the dark. There we go. You've got beat charts down. You understand how they work. You've seen how they use them in Tales from the Red. This is good. All of this is good. You are doing a fantastic job as a new GM if this is where you're at. Even if you haven't read through Tales of the Red, as long as you understand beat charts, you will probably be better than a lot of new GMs that I see sometimes crop up on Reddit, who are writing something and they're not following the idea of what a proper risk reward is. You know, they're not following the idea laid out that, if you're encountering only a certain amount of risk or of danger, that you're supposed to only award a certain amount of money, or you do the opposite where you're way too stingy with your economy, which we'll talk about all of that as we kind of get into the series that I kind of want to start this, with this being the first video. So writing a gig, what do we need to kind of start that? So the first thing that we definitely want to look at is from the standpoint of our setting, right? We want to understand our lore. And so what I recommend to people, without going into too much detail about this in this video, is to look at one district of the city and try to understand really well the things that go on there, right? Understand the landmarks, understand what the people are like, understand which gangs are maybe taking residents up in that territory, because all of those things are going to kind of shape what kind of a story, not only that we want to tell, but maybe that we can tell if we're being true to the setting. Of course, your Night City can be whatever you want it to be. You know, I'm not here to tell you that it has to be exactly how it is in the book. I know I've taken liberties with it in Neon Inferno and in other content that I've done off camera for my personal groups. So if you are considering something that doesn't quite work with the world and the way the book is written to an absolute T, that's fine. You just do you. You know, if you decide, hey, you know, actually South Night City is a great place to be, it's not a shithole combat zone, great. Yeah, maybe the Upper Marina is what South Night City is in the book, right? If you want to do that, that's your city, that's your Night City, and that's awesome. Like, do it. If you want to maybe mimic closer to 2077 Night City, where, you know, most of the inner city is relatively safe, and then it's the outlying areas that maybe get more dangerous, that's fine too, right? Bottom line, wherever you put your story, even if it's not Night City, if it's maybe, I've seen some people do real world cities as their campaign settings, like Chicago or Phoenix. Even if you do places like that, you can do what I'm saying basically, and not just understand the chunk of the world that you are basing whatever gig or story you want to tell into, right? Know what that is, know the players there, know the landmarks, and then use those as your set pieces, right? Use those to set your risks, your stakes, etc. So world out of the way. Now we talk about what is our story gonna be, right? So for this, usually I'm writing in a campaign, right? So I look at something that I did not come up with. I wish I was smart and charming enough to have come up with it. But there's a great concept known as the sentence of a campaign. And so what the sentence is, first of all, it was conceptualized by legendary GM Guy Sklanders. So I know other cyberpunk content creators on YouTube have talked about this. They've discussed the concept of what the sentence is supposed to be, what it's supposed to give you. And so they might have an explanation of mine. Doesn't do it justice. Yell at me in the comments about it, but I think I have a fairly good idea of what it is. But the other content creators give some examples too. So I definitely say they're all equally valid. Go to one of theirs if maybe mine is somehow lacking or it doesn't make sense. But what you're getting out of the sentence essentially is the baseline for any story that you want to tell in the world, right? And so usually the sentence is built like this. So the opposition or hiring party, so you can be either one, right? Either your fixer or the bad guys, have something that they want in a certain time frame or in a particular way or for a particular reason, but there is some kind of issue preventing that from happening. And so this issue is typically either caused by your players, or it's the reason that the players themselves are being hired in to resolve the issue for the force that has brought them on the scene, right? And so whatever that issue is, that now becomes the focal point of the gig, right? And so if that one sentence is all you write, that is a gig right there. So you just say oppositional force, you know, what is the time constraint? What is the issue that we are going to try and solve, right? And most importantly, what do they want? You know, what is this issue kind of leading you toward? So I've picked a great, pretty general, non-controversial, certainly won't get canceled on Twitter example, Harry Potter, because everyone loves Harry Potter and there's nothing controversial about it at all. So the sentence that I would frame around that story, at least as far as it starts, right? We're not going to get too deep into it because one, I don't want a lawsuit, and two, I don't want to be canceled. So with that said, the way I would put the Harry Potter sentence, at least as far as that first book goes, is Voldemort wants to be resurrected as quick as possible after losing one of his many lives and several of his allies to Harry Potter, the boy who lived. But that same child stands in his way at every turn from the second he starts learning magic. And those turns and why is the stuff that our players are going to do, right? If that was our story as a GM, that is the way that that will play out. So that's where we kind of depart from the written example there, which is kind of where we would then lead into that in a book. And now where we as GMs are examining that as the gig or the campaign or whatever. So from there, we go to what can the oppositional force call down, right? Like, what are your resources if you are the corporation or the gang that somehow is in the middle of this, right? So in my example here, obviously that would be the Death Eaters, right? If you're looking at Harry Potter. So the Death Eaters here are going to attack Harry Potter. They're going to attack his friends. They are going to go after maybe their parents, right? Their families. And overall, you basically want this part of it to fit in with your character's life paths, right? So this is what I like to use as a GM, even in single shot gigs, is when you are building a campaign, the stakes or a gig, the stakes should always be personal. Your players should always feel personally attacked by whatever you're doing. And I don't mean that in a mean way, right? We as GMs, the first thing to remember if you're a new GM, you are never against your players. Your players are living in the world that you create. And so anytime that you are wielding the bad guys against them, I always make a point of cheering for my players. You celebrate their successes. You say, oh, fuck, whenever the 1 rolls on their side and the 10 rolls on the enemy side, because really we're not there to be antagonistic toward them unless we are role playing the enemy ourselves in the moment, right? So like you might be the evil corpo in the moment, and then you get to sneer at them. You get to tell them you're worthless, you're gutter trash. You get to do all that evil villain stuff, right? But once we're done delivering the line or shooting the gun as the villain, we go right back to being on the player's side because that's our character, right? We are playing the bad guy. We may play one of the good guys even in a conflict. You get to be both things, right? If they have an NPC helping them, like is the case a lot in Neon Inferno, you'll end up playing both hats, right? So from there, once we kind of establish, you know, who is our bad guy, what allies or assets do they have to throw against our party, we now have to determine, you know, who has a stake in this that the players will be helping, right? Because they're going to be assisting one of the two sides in the conflict, right? They are either going to be hired by the group that the issue has happened to, or they will be causing an issue for whomever they've gone in and are opposing, right? So let's use the first example. Say it's a corporation, right? Corporation had their shit knocked over, their transport got hit by a booster gang, and the party needs to go in and they need to get the shit back, right? Whatever it is, food, weapons, whatever, you know? And so the corporation has called them through their fixer to get the stuff back, and they've offered a tidy bonus. They can get, you know, 80% of the stuff back intact, right? Because they understand, you know, maybe the booster gangers have already torn into it. But if you can get 80% back intact, that's still reasonable. It's within our profit margins, whatever, you know, evil corpo shit. So they'll go there. And then the nice thing I like to kind of wedge in there is give them a little moral dilemma, right? Because there's a reason that stuff was taken, right? And it's not always just, yeah, man, we really wanted them bits of kibble and drugs. Like sometimes it is, I have a family. This is the only way we get to eat. We are broke. We are literally huddled over here in this bombed out building that looks ready to collapse if a stiff breeze hit it. Like, we need this. So when the crew goes there, and they need the money too, right? Like Cyberpunk at its core is a survival game. So they need the money to survive and pay their rent and get their food. But this group of people has taken this stuff because they need it to live. So now what happens, right? Because maybe the crew says, you know, we'll cover for you, right? We'll take half of as much as we need, because we need something to show for our efforts to the corp, but we leave you with enough that you won't starve overnight, right? We'll give you a week to figure out your next play. And so in so doing that, maybe they get a little bit of a compromise investment between the party and this group of people and the corporation, right? Everyone gets a little something, but no one gets the lion's share of anything, right? So the corporation will still pay them. They'll still give them the 1,000 or 2,000, whatever eddies that they were promised, right? But this group of people now that they've made a contact of, they now can help them in the future, right? So if we're playing a campaign, that gets really important. Or even if we're just building loose one-shots into something that resembles a campaign later, these people are now important to the story. They are allies, more or less. You know, at least we've done them a solid, so they at the very least owe us one in return. That's the rule of the street. So let's look at it from another angle. Say you're hired by the booster gangers who need to knock a shipment over, right? So obviously a corporation isn't going to be homeless and starving. They, however, have far greater resources to throw against the party in the aftermath. So let's start looking at it. Fixer hires you in, says, hey, there's a group of 6th Street gangers that noticed some of the local civilians were starving. And so they've scoped out a Continental Brands transport. They're going to knock it over, and they need your help being getaway drivers to get the stuff out of there. So, or providing cover to their driver so that they can get out of there. You know, however you want to shape the gig, that would be where you get to figure out, you know, where do my players fit in as the GM? But you know that all of these elements have to kind of be there to be part of the gig. And so you take that information, present it to your players, and say, okay, you are going to knock this thing over. So now what the players are doing, the moral quandary becomes, okay, we're doing this good thing for the local community, but we are risking our necks because now a corporation is going to see our fingerprints or our, net footprint, if we're running a net runner in here, on whatever we touch. So anything that we touch, if we're not really careful, we will be found. And that is even better, especially against new people. If you as a good GM are looking at that, you're thinking, all right, rule 0 of Cyberpunk is that the city never forgets. The city is a character. And you have to keep note of what has happened in the city to the players and what they've done in the city, because that builds consequences. And then when they get a little too big for their britches, they decide, man, we've been having a run of good luck. We've been hitting everything. We've been like raking in the eddies. Right at the height of their hubris, you send in that corporate hit squad because they knocked their transport over in session 1. And so session 4, they're coming knocking, right? And so that is the long-term consequence of doing it from the other side, right? Or even if we use our first example, giving everything to the civilians. Well, now the corporation says, what did these incompetent edge runners do? They took our, they took our trust and our food and gave it to these, poor people. And maybe the edge runner still gets something out of it personally, like maybe they get a reduced payout or something. Or they broker a deal with a local fixer who is willing to pay for the food. But now the corporation's on their tail. So that's kind of what we want to do, right? And we always want that to end up being personal. So never settle for a generic villain, except for maybe your first couple sessions if you're running, again, that longer form campaign. Never settle for a generic villain when a personal one will do. So this is what I call a replacement, right? So what we do is we replace one of the NPCs that is more general in the original script of our gig, right? And after we look at our players' life paths, we say, this one had his family wiped out by a corporation. Well, that corporation should be the one that they're stealing from now, right? Or it's the one that they're forced to work with. So now they've got an extra stake in how this plays out, because they would probably be more inclined, playing in their character's headspace, to say, fuck this corporation. I don't want anything to do with this corporation. As a matter of fact, they deserve less than nothing. And I think all these poor people that are getting victimized, like my family was victimized, the way that I was left an orphan, they don't deserve to have that happen to them. This corporation can suck it. And then that leads to all kinds of fun stuff down the road, especially, again, if we're writing this not as a one-shot, but a campaign. You can develop that thread into all kinds of neat stuff that then hunts the players down later or haunts them. There's so much we can do with that. And so that is kind of the very bare bones way that we go about conceptualizing the gig. So what I want to do in probably the next video here is I'm going to start showing you how I take this concept that I've discussed here more as an abstraction, and we develop that forward into our first gig, and we write that down, right? And so I'll show an example of kind of putting these pieces together in that space, rather than offering that example in this video, because I think it is probably better to show that visually. So as always, if you found this video informative, please like, comment especially, subscribe. Let me know if there's something that I missed, something you've done at your table, those of you who have GM'd a bit and want to share something with the other viewers, because I firmly believe that by sharing the best parts of our games, we all get to learn something and take something out of it back to our own table. So definitely share those things. Definitely let me know if you have any feedback for me. And I will hopefully see you in the next video in this series. And until then, I'll see you in Night City.